So the following is a preamble to a series of dialogues about Professor Kraus's book of Sound Mind, how our brain constructs a meaningful sonic world. And our hope is to just have some dialogues to explain and expound upon some of the ideas in the book, and we hope you'll enjoy the journey. Book, it's fabulous. And there's this like joy and this awe and wonder that came through your writing and your work in science that I just, it's so hard to find that these days. Ian's work was similar, and in both of your books, happened to be reading them at the same time, but there's this idea that like science had to be grounded in the real world and like lived experience. And I think as a clinician that sort of resonated with me. So definitely changed my life in many practical ways that are lived.
I'm so glad to hear that because it's what I feel. I am the luckiest scientist. I feel awe and wonder about the world that I get to think about, and for my job, and I'm so glad that came across. And another thing that I think is often forgotten about science is, that everyone is often focused on the objectivity, but in fact, science is done by people. And I think, and that my book is full of personal stories. And in the same way you were saying, okay, so grounded in the world, but it's grounded in my world, no matter how big or how small. So I'm glad you noticed. I'm glad you felt that way.
Yeah. Well, I love that quote that you have, that the hearing brain is vast, because that sense of vastness also really came through. So many things that I had taken for granted about hearing, or it kind of felt like it was opening up, like I was seeing this huge picture. It was just like the scale of it more and more too. I love how there's this one, I think in the intro, you were just talking about like how, okay, imagine, 1 second, now a tenth of a second, now a thousandth of a second. Like that's how fast your, auditory neurons are processing this information. And it felt to me like the sense of, I went to the planetarium the other day. I live in LA, so the Griffith Observatory, and they're talking about like the scale of the universe, and they just kept going, okay, imagine this distance and this distance, and it just like kind of blows your mind. That small sense just opens something up that like really is life changing, and to me it feels like the antidote to a lot of the sort of malaise that like especially my generation feels. This sort of feeling is such a antidote to that.
I hope we'll really get into that and create an antidote together. But the hearing brain is vast, and also the time part of it. Our auditory system is the temporal expert of the brain, and but it involves this vast geography in terms of our brain, our body, and our mind. And I think that one of the things that I find stifling in our world is the compartmentalization of disciplines. And if you think of the different hearing disciplines and the different philosophical disciplines, people have their niche, and I think the niches are really useful to the extent that we have common vocabulary and such. But at least I find that the ideas that I like best are the ones that are ones that draw from multiple areas of study.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just like something in Ian's book where he talks about, the science and philosophy, the split between them was like the most damaging thing for a lot of science, because it lacked the import into the real world where all the meaningful stuff happens.
And I think we should tell our listeners that one of the things that brought us together was Ian McGilchrist, in that you were reading his book, and he's one of my great heroes. And fortunately, he also endorsed Of Sound Mind, which was one of my greatest pleasures.
I don't know if you have listened to any of the dialogues, but he mentions you several times in them. There was just one I was listening to the other day, and he was just saying, like, that's why I think this was the actual point, was that you had come from comparative literature, and I'd gone through this meandering path, and that was why you did such great science. And he mentions you specifically. So
Oh, I missed those. Thanks for thanks for letting me know.
yeah.
But Ian too, I mean, he started out as a literary critic, and in fact, I'm just reading now his very first book, which is called Against Criticism, and that's very much kind of rooted in the humanities, where he was initially himself, and then he became a physician and a physicist and a philosopher and everything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I really think that that's such fertile ground. I haven't read it, but there was this book that came out recently called Range, that talks about how most of the typical advice has been to specialize in something, at the expense of kind of everything else that you can do. And that most of the successful people and the innovations that have been created in the past several decades have been all from generalists who have maybe specialized in a field for a time, but have gained expertise across at least three different fields, because they're able to import some way of thinking that may seem very, very common in one field to another, and that to those people in that field it seems just like totally, they can't even conceive of it. Yeah, there really is this,
yeah,
like, I notice it in speech therapy, is that there's this like blindness to everything outside of speech therapy. So
yeah, including hearing.
including, yeah, the fundamental aspects of speech and language, like those things are kind of dismissed. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's so
But
strange.
so I think that I live this idea very very deeply. I mean, it resonates with me. As someone who was brought up a citizen of a couple of languages and cultures. I really don't feel like I belong in one place. I feel like I belong in the intersection, and it was only later that I realized, oh, um, not only personally but also scientifically, I belong. I mean, my field is an intersection, and it has hurt me, in many ways. I think that we are told to specialize, and I think many people are motivated by when people think about success, they often think about money, and that has never been a motivating force for me. I need to make enough money to earn a living, but very very early on, when I first got my PhD, I had some offers to work at companies that would quadruple the salary that I would make as a postdoc. But I loved the academic freedom and the the beauty that academia at its best can offer a person who wants to pursue their own ideas. But the other is, if you look at the home page of our website, Brainvolts, which I hope will just become a go-to place for many, many people,
More than a
is,
hot dog stand.
well, yeah. But people have asked me. So if you look at the homepage, you'll see that we study music, we study rhythm, we study concussion, language disorders, reading, autism, we study aging, all of these things, and I'm always told, so specialized. I'm told to specialize many times. When we've looked at oh, products that we've wanted to commercialize, or grants that we want to write. I mean, we have a lot of trouble. I mean, I think what really happens in our work is that because our work intersects multiple fields, they don't fit into the study sections, for example, of the National Institutes of Health,
Mhm.
they do fit into the broad mission of the National Institutes of Health, but the people who make the funding decisions are people who are really specialized, and I don't belong to that club. And I think it's a very evolutionarily common idea that if something is different, kill it, right?
Yeah, right,
So
right.
it's been, both our agony and our ecstasy, but what can you do? You just kind of keep fishing and try to do the best job you can.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and the margins, between places are such fertile ground for, the place where there's the most possibility for, transformation and, really fundamental positive change. And yeah, I resonate so much with that whole in between feeling in my own life, personally, like kind of not sure if I'm Japanese or American, and then like, going through to even the type of music I make, I've had so many rejections because my music, if it doesn't fit into like, this electronic box or, this jazz box or, whatever it is, it's just like in between those things. So even if it's great, there's not a lot of space for it to expand. I don't know what the right
Yeah,
word is, but
Garrett, I think that you started out speaking about our malaise these days as a culture, and you were saying as a generation. I think that because more and more of the world is run by machines, first of all, we're becoming more and more like the machines that we have to interact with. And and the machine wants a decision like, well, what field are you in? What kind of music do you like? As though there were an answer.
yeah, that idea from, the matter of things, really that changed my life to a large degree. That the idea that there is this impulse, especially this left hemisphere impulse, to need, just like a machine, to need an answer for something. And yeah, so much of the world seems to be falling into that. In my field, definitely in speech therapy, there seems to be this idea that if it's not measurable, it's not doing anything. So that's why, at the expense of trying to cultivate these rich interpersonal interactions between the caregiver and child, for example, they are then using decontextualized flashcards to count how many times that the child got the flashcard right. And that is like totally pervasive. I could say that
Yeah, yeah.
90% of therapists are doing that. And it's motivated by the same structures that they put in place, to try and deal with problems, but they become these like machine-like forces that force these measurements on us. um,
Let's stay with speech pathology for a moment. One of the speech pathologists I work with, Megan Roberts, has really kind of revolutionized the thinking in speech that so much of effective therapy is going to involve the child and their caregiver. And this is not the way the field has been traditionally thinking, and it's incredibly important. And if we can move things along, you and I have a deep interest in music. I can't imagine a better field. Oh, I can imagine many fields, but a very wonderful field for music is speech pathology. We know that so much of language is rooted in sound, and how music and rhythm, undergird language processing. And why not have music be an integral part of speech pathology? But at least I keep encountering resistance because, oh, it's not in my scope of practice, and it's, evidence based. And I like evidence. I like science. This is what I do.
Right.
But I don't want the knowledge that we have attained as a field to get in the way of these little boxes and hoops that we're supposed to jump through in order to bring something into the clinic, when converging evidence certainly by now has told us that music is something that can help us in terms of language development.
Yeah. And one thing that your work definitely suggested to me was that even that foundational box, that the separation that we make between music and speech, in the first place, which sort of creates these like fields. It's like, oh, I do music, I don't do speech, or I do speech, I don't do music. That very fundamental distinction that we've made, that they're totally these separate things. There is so much overlap, and we can't just say that they're these, your brain's doing this thing one day and this thing one day, like, and there's absolutely no connection between those two things. Yeah, so maybe part of this is like a reframing of even that fundamental distinction between music and speech in the first place.
Yeah, I mean,
Because
so many. Yeah.
yeah, no, I'm just thinking of like early infant vocalizations. They border, there's like a very vague boundary between what is a musical, infant vocalization versus a speech vocalization. So,
Well, I mean, the music comes first. I mean, you
right,
have
right,
the,
yeah.
the music of speech. And so there's a wonderful book called The Singing Neanderthal by a fellow
Yeah,
by the name
Stephen
of Mifflin.
Midden, yeah,
Yeah.
within, yeah.
And of course, there are many things, many interesting things. That's where we get the awe is when we think of all the things that we don't know. And I think you and I are very comfortable with not knowing most things. But it still inspires awe. But we don't know. Where did music come from? Where did language come from? And he makes the argument. He's an anthropologist. He makes the argument that music preceded language, and I think that that's true in development too, because babies, we speak to babies in song, and long before they're able to make words, they understand. They understand the music of speech, and
It's so
so
funny, yeah.
it's just completely intertwined, and I kind of actually come from the point of view of music is much more basic, and in fact I think it's something that we see in many organisms. Music is something that is more basic, and that language is something that we build on top of it in our own way. And but there is this tremendous interplay, which is why the hearing brain is so vast and involves all of these things. And as a biologist, it's really fun to be able to pull myself away from the individual discipline of, oh, these guys study cognition, these guys study the gut, these guys study audio visual integration. But the hearing brain has all of those things, and what a vast playground for a scientist.
Yeah, that's so cool. It is a vast playground. And it's funny that you mentioned the because right before this call, I was seeing a kid. This is my first time meeting the child, but all of not really talking yet in productive, spontaneous utterances, but has all of those musical, all of these like very music. All of her utterances are all very prosodic, and I can hear the parents right there, and they're all modeling, and there's this beautiful interplay. And so, yeah, I mean that definitely seems anecdotally true to me.
But think about also the experience of, I think biologically, many, I mean, genetics certainly plays a role, but also, um, we are what we do. And if you think of, what is a baby hearing in the womb? The baby's not going to be hearing consonants and vowels. Baby is going to be hearing the music of speech.
Mm,
And which is why we know, the beautiful work by Carl Esquerra and his group in Barcelona, have shown that already newborn babies prefer the sounds of the languages that they heard in utero, and they prefer the music that they heard in utero.
that's amazing.
So, already,
Wow.
for the many months as a child is developing, experience is shaping the development of a child, which is why we should, as clinicians, I mean, and I'm not a clinician, I'm so glad you are, but I hope that clinicians will embrace, well, certainly music as a clinical avenue.
Yeah, I do too. I certainly do. I know, I think more and more, another box that I tend to see, at least in the speech therapy field, is this kind of oh, this is genetic. That the child comes into the world with this physiology. There's nothing we can do about it. And more I see the like kind of the huge role that experience plays. Early, especially early auditory experience that your book discusses a lot in shaping sound mind and how that it's plastic throughout life. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. It seems to be another kind of theme in the book that there's maybe a larger role that auditory experience plays, and
Yeah,
maybe it's also because of that point that you make that it's invisible. So
yeah.
much of our early auditory input is it's temporal, it's invisible. The sound forms only last for so long, so
Yeah.
you don't really think
Yeah.
about it.
I mean, sound itself is invisible, which I think is one of the reasons it's so under recognized and underappreciated. And I feel like I've devoted my career to changing uh, that idea, and the fact that once we can know and appreciate the enormous effect that sound has on our biology, we can do things. We can make choices. We can make sound choices for for ourselves. And so I'm not a clinician, but I have grandbabies, so I'm nonna Nina, and I can see. I mean, I spend so much time making music with my grandbabies, and this is it's a choice that I make, and it's something we do in our house, in our family. Um, but I think in every single aspect, every of sound mind has several chapters where we cover all some different topics, and in each one there are choices that we can make. We've been talking about music and the choices we can make for good. I think there's a chapter there on noise, and again, these are choices that we can make, and that we can make for our grandbabies and for our own personal lives. Once we understand, I think we need to understand, well, biologically, what does moderate level sound do to us biologically? And I hope we'll spend a whole hour talking about this at some point, but we just do know, and then back to our generation, your generation, everyone, especially in your generation, my students, are saying to me, I'm so stressed, I'm so anxious, I can't pay attention, have difficulty focusing. Well, sound is our alarm sense from deep evolutionary roots. And so we are spending our lives in a mild sense a mild state of alarm, which is stressful and impedes our thinking. It impedes how we feel. It impedes every single part of this vast sound mind. But we have to realize what is happening around us and what we can do personally and as a society to to mitigate the pernicious effects of moderate level sound. I mean, everybody knows that loud sounds will damage your ears. I'm talking about moderate level sounds that are meaningless, and how their pernicious effect on the sound mind.
Yeah, and it's in some ways it's incredibly hopeful, because there's something you could do about it. Like you mentioned the all the hated word, a choice, or I can make a decision to do something. Um, I feel like you were mentioning before, about how a lot of things are feeling more machine-like. There's definitely all these ideas, reductionism, materialism, that seem to indicate that we're all just machines. But I think all this is very hopeful that, we do have, like, if we realize what's going on, that we have the power to make certain choices.
Yeah.
And we could change things. And that seems like really hopeful for anybody. And especially as a therapist, it's like, wow, we can affect change in a positive direction for families, and for kids who are going to be growing up in this world, and um, whose communication is foundational for their success in such world. So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think we have to um, get out of the habit. You know, people so often refer to the brain as a machine. We are not machines at all. The brain works nothing like a machine. And, we need to deeply understand that, or, we're lost.
I don't know if you're familiar with George Lakoff's work. He does all this work on metaphor, and how it's deeply embedded in our language. Like the language that we use is, and especially scientific language. I think Ian mentions this in the book. Is like scientific language, especially, is dependent on metaphor, because so much of it is not explicit in how we go about viewing the world. And I hear the brain as a machine, as a computer, us as machines and computers. It's so pervasive in, like, all metaphorical language that I don't even think we process it or see it anymore. And it's just something that I sort of took for granted all the way through college. I mean, even up to reading The Matter with Things was like, I had taken so much of that, myself as an algorithm, for granted. Um, so I think it's probably more pervasive and pernicious than we even realize. But yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah.
agree.
I think, but becoming aware of what I see as truths. I mean, if you're a biologist, surely you know that the brain works nothing like a machine. And, I think we need to, we embrace machines. I use them all the time for my science. They're great.
Yeah.
But we're talking about artificial intelligence and transcribing transcripts, and there are many things that machines help us with. But I think also something that I'm deeply comfortable with is what you might think of as paradox, is that both things are true. Is that machines can figure out, or the person programming the machine can help with certain tasks, but also the brain works nothing like a machine. So, and that's fine. but we really need to think. We need to think and carefully about about the language we use and about the way we think about ourselves and our agency as clinicians, as people in the world. And I think what is certainly germane to what I think about is as a biologist.
Absolutely. I think that's a great place to stop the first session, which I hope will be the first of many to come for the of Sound Mind dialogues. Um, yeah, is there anything maybe that you want to mention for? Uh, looks like just because my Zoom's coming to an end, that's why I mentioned. I don't want these calls to end.
Okay,
It's so
so
fun for
next
me, but
time, maybe we need to definitely not have a machine dictate when these calls are over.
right, right.
So
Yes,
I think
that's number
that
one.
that'll be important. But no, I think we've done it's been fun, So let's take this as a stopping point, and we're starting to roll a little bit, and let's just move on and see what we can create together.